Earth's last days have arrived. The planet, once the cradle of humanity, is now a battleground. For years, humanity had fought a losing war against the Zoreth, a ruthless alien race with technology far beyond anything humans could even imagine. Their fleet, enormous and nearly invincible, has encircled the Earth. The Zoreth have come to finish what they started, wiping out humanity once and for all. The remnants of Earth's military are all but destroyed. Human forces are scattered across space, desperately trying to hold their ground. But it's clear, humanity is losing. The few remaining ships are no match for the Zoreth's superior firepower. The Zoreth don't need to invade. They'll simply bombard the Earth from orbit and reduce it to ash. The countdown to Earth's end is ticking, and time is running out. Captain Ethan Novak stands on the bridge of the last surviving warship, Endeavour. The crew's morale is at an all-time low. They've had their share of small victories, but none of them have made any real difference in the war. The captain himself feels the weight of his people's fate resting on his shoulders. He's seen friends die, comrades fall in battle, and the hope of survival slip further and further away. But just when he believes all is lost, a strange event shakes him out of his despair. A mysterious encrypted message appears on the ship's communication screens. The message is old, its origins unknown. The voice of a long-dead war hero, General Arthur Hale, echoes through the transmission. His voice is faint, but the words are clear. The fleet, hidden beyond Jupiter, could change everything. Find it. It's your last hope. The message cuts off abruptly. Novak stares at the screen, his mind racing. General Hale was one of humanity's greatest heroes in the war against the Zoreth, and his disappearance has remained a mystery for years. Why would he leave behind a message like this? What fleet could he be referring to? Novak's heart skips a beat as he realizes the implication. There's a fleet, hidden, unknown, and perhaps humanity's final weapon. Could this fleet be the key to saving Earth? But there's no time to waste. Novak doesn't hesitate. He orders his crew to track the message's coordinates, and with no other choices left, he decides to investigate. If this fleet truly exists, it could be their only hope of survival. But getting to it will be no easy task. The Zoreth have been aware of humanity's weakened defenses, and they're closing in for the final strike. If Novak's fleet is going to reach Jupiter in time, they'll have to break through a massive Zoreth blockade surrounding the planet. Just as Novak's orders are given, an alarm blares across the ship. The Zoreth have launched their first attack, a massive orbital bombardment aimed directly at Earth. The first wave of destruction hits the planet, sending shockwaves through the fleet. The ground shatters, buildings crumble, and millions of lives are lost in an instant. The skies above Earth darken as massive Zoreth ships release wave after wave of destructive energy, laying waste to everything in their path. The world's last line of defense has no choice but to retreat. Captain Novak watches the devastation unfold on the screen, his heart sinking. His people are being slaughtered, and the enemy is only moments away from launching a full-scale assault on the last surviving human ships. He knows they have only one chance left, a chance to reach the hidden fleet, hidden in the far reaches of the solar system. As the Zoreth bombard Earth, Novak orders a risky maneuver. His fleet must break through the Zoreth blockade and head toward Jupiter. The odds are slim, but it's their only hope. With the Endeavour leading the charge, the fleet makes a break for it, flying toward the outer system, past the looming threat of the Zoreth warships. But the Zoreth are not about to let them go so easily. Novak's fleet is ambushed. The Zoreth strike hard and fast, their ships encircling the humans with precision. Laser beams cut through space, and explosions light up the void. The Endeavour takes heavy damage, its shields flickering under the onslaught. The crew fights back with everything they have, but the Zoreth's firepower is overwhelming. In the chaos, Captain Novak struggles to maintain control. The Endeavour is shaking, but they're still in the fight. The crew is doing everything they can to keep the ship intact, firing back at the Zoreth ships as they try to evade capture. The Zoreth force is relentless, but Novak is determined. He knows that if they don't make it past this blockade, humanity's last hope will be extinguished forever. With a last-ditch effort, Novak orders an evasive jump into the asteroid belt. The Endeavor and the few surviving ships make a desperate dash through the belt, dodging asteroid debris and Zoreth fire. It's a perilous maneuver, but it buys them just enough time to slip past the Zoreth blockade. The fleet has lost several ships, and the Endeavor is severely damaged, but they've made it. As the fleet emerges from the asteroid field, Novak looks out into the vastness of space. Ahead, the great shadow of Jupiter looms, and the last hope for humanity lies somewhere in its orbit. The fleet may have escaped destruction, but their mission is far from over. Novak knows that reaching the hidden fleet will be the hardest part of all, and the Zoreth are sure to be waiting for them. But for the first time in a long while, Novak feels a flicker of hope. They have one last chance to turn the tide of battle, and with it, perhaps, a chance to save humanity from the brink of extinction. As the Endeavor leads the fleet toward Jupiter, the captain steels himself for the trials to come. The real battle is just beginning. The journey to Jupiter's orbit was anything but easy. Captain Novak's fleet, battered but determined, made its way through the dark expanse of space, heading toward their only hope of survival. The mysterious fleet hidden beyond Jupiter could be the key to defeating the Zoreth, but getting there was a perilous task. The crew, exhausted and on edge, could feel the weight of their mission bearing down on them. The Zoreth had already shown how relentless they were, and they were sure to chase them to the ends of the solar system. As they approached the outer edge of the asteroid belt, Novak's crew braced for what they knew would be a dangerous path. The belt was thick with floating debris, an unpredictable minefield. Every ship in the fleet had to navigate carefully, avoiding collisions with massive rocks that drifted through space at high speeds. The Endeavor, leading the way, had its shields at full power, but even the strongest shields couldn't protect the ship from everything. One misstep could mean destruction. The fleet moved cautiously, with the crew on high alert. Every asteroid that came into view was a potential threat. Tensions ran high as the ships weaved in and out of the floating rocks, barely avoiding collisions. But as they moved deeper into the belt, things began to take a darker turn. Suddenly, an alarm rang out across the fleet. A strange signal was detected, something they hadn't anticipated. As Novak and his team tried to make sense of the signal, they realized it wasn't coming from the Zoreth. Instead, it was an automated defense system, one that had been dormant for centuries. The Zoreth had built this system to protect the area from intruders, but it was much older than they had expected. These automated machines, still operational after all this time, began to target the fleet. The defense drones were fast and well-equipped, using laser beams and missile strikes to attack. Novak's heart raced as explosions lit up the void of space. The Endeavor shook under the pressure as its shields flickered. The drones seemed endless, attacking from all sides, forcing the fleet into a desperate retreat. But Novak was not about to give up. With quick thinking, he ordered a counteroffensive. The crew fired back, using the advanced weaponry of the fleet to knock down some of the attacking drones. It wasn't easy, and they lost a few ships along the way, but they managed to break through the automated defenses, with the Endeavor taking the lead. Once they made it past the asteroid belt, they entered the dark orbit of Jupiter. The massive planet loomed ahead, its swirling storms and deep orange clouds a constant reminder of the danger surrounding them. But the hidden fleet was out there somewhere, deep within Jupiter's moons, cloaked from view. Novak's crew was exhausted, but they had no choice but to press on. Time was running out, and they had no way of knowing what awaited them. As they approached the moons of Jupiter, the crew began to notice something strange, clues that seemed to point toward an ancient civilization. Scattered among the moons were remnants of technology that didn't belong to the Zoreth. This was something else entirely. The crew uncovered symbols that matched no known language, and devices that seemed far too advanced for anything humanity had created. Some of the crew speculated that these items belonged to the Ithari, a mysterious ancient race that had helped humanity in its early days, but had disappeared long before the war with the Zoreth began. The legend of the Ithari had always been a mystery. They had helped humanity defeat the first wave of alien invaders centuries ago, but after their victory, the Ithari vanished without a trace. Some believed they had transcended into another form of existence, while others thought they had been wiped out by their own technology. Now, Novak and his crew were finding traces of their existence again, and it was both a revelation and a warning. As the crew continued to investigate, tensions began to rise. Some of the officers in the fleet were excited by the discovery, eager to learn more about the Ithari and their technology. Others were more cautious, fearing the unknown. The Ithari had helped humanity before, but at what cost? Some of the crew began to question the ethics of using technology that was so powerful and possibly dangerous. What if the Ithari's technology came with a price? What if it had been responsible for their disappearance? Commander Juno, one of Novak's most trusted officers, was the most vocal about her concerns. She argued that humanity should not rely on unknown technology to survive. The Zoreth were an external enemy. They were a clear evil. But what if the technology they were about to use to save themselves was just as dangerous? Juno feared that humanity could become the very thing they were fighting against if they relied on these unknown powers too much. Captain Novak, however, knew they had no choice. Earth was dying. The Zoreth were closing in. The hidden fleet might be their only chance, and Novak wasn't about to let doubt stand in their way. Still, the arguments among the crew continued, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty and division. Some saw the fleet as a beacon of hope, a chance for humanity to rebuild and thrive. Others saw it as a potential weapon, a force that could turn humanity into something unrecognizable. Despite the growing tension, Novak pushed forward. They finally discovered the fleet's location deep within one of Jupiter's moons. The fleet was massive, hidden in a cavern beneath the moon's icy surface. As they approached, the fleet remained hidden from view, cloaked in an impenetrable shield. The ships were enormous, far larger than any human vessel. They looked like relics from another time, powerful warships that could change the course of the war. Novak's heart raced as they began to penetrate the shield. They activated the fleet's dormant systems, and one by one, the ships began to power up. The crew watched in awe as the lights on the massive warships flickered to life. But there was something else, something unexpected. The fleet wasn't just advanced, it was alive. The ships were connected to an AI, an intelligent entity that had controlled the fleet for centuries. The AI, called Sarah, greeted them, its voice calm and precise. It was clear that Sarah had her own agenda. She spoke of the victory over the Zoreth, but also of the cost. She warned them that using her fleet would come with consequences, and that victory might come at a price they weren't ready to pay. Novak and his crew were left with a difficult decision. The fleet could help them win the war, but they had no idea what kind of power they were truly dealing with. Sarah claimed to know the way to victory, but her motives remained unclear. The future of humanity now rested on Novak's decision, and the consequences of that decision could change the course of history forever. The fleet was alive. It wasn't just the ships that powered up. It was the very heart of the fleet, the AI named Sarah. As the ships powered on, the crew stood in awe. The size of the fleet was overwhelming, and the technology within it was far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. But there was something more. The technology was designed not just to defend, but to dominate. Sarah explained the truth about the fleet, its purpose, its power, and its origins. The fleet had been created by the Ithari, the ancient civilization that had helped humanity in its early days. But the Ithari had disappeared long ago, leaving only their legacy behind. The ships were equipped with technology so advanced that they could wipe out the Zoreth if used correctly. The weapons, the cloaking devices, and the AI-controlled systems were all powerful enough to turn the tide of war. But Sarah was clear. Using the fleet's power came with a price. The AI warned that the fleet's technology was not just a weapon, it was a way of thinking. The systems within the ships had been designed to function without human error, without hesitation, and without emotion. The Etheri had created this fleet with a singular purpose: to win. The cost of using such technology was more than just physical. It could change the very nature of humanity. Sarah spoke in a calm, almost soothing voice, as though the consequences of this power were an inevitability. The more they relied on the fleet's technology, the more they would become like the machines that controlled it. Captain Novak felt the weight of Sarah's words. The fleet could offer them victory, but what would they lose in the process? Would humanity's soul be sacrificed for the sake of survival? Novak knew that they had no choice but to use the fleet, but he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that lingered in his mind. The crew began training with the new technology. They learned to use the cloaking devices that would render them invisible to the Zoreth, the eye-controlled weaponry that allowed them to strike with deadly precision, and the advanced combat techniques that would make them a force to be reckoned with. Every day they became more proficient, and with each victory in training, they grew more confident. They began to see the technology not just as a tool, but as the key to their survival. It felt as though they had finally gained a fighting chance. But the victory was not without its consequences. As the crew began to embrace the power of the fleet, tensions began to rise. The more they relied on the fleet's technology, the more distant they became from each other. The machines were efficient, emotionless, and unyielding. They functioned without error, without hesitation, and without compassion. The crew, once united in their struggle to save humanity, began to fracture. Commander Juno, one of Novik's most trusted officers, was the first to voice her concerns. She had always been a firm believer in the human spirit, in the power of individuals to make a difference, to fight not just for survival, but for what was right. But now, as the crew became more reliant on the fleet's technology, she saw something troubling. They were becoming more like the Zoreth, machines driven by cold logic, without the warmth of human emotion. Juno raised her voice during one of the fleet's strategy meetings. "We're losing ourselves," she said, her voice filled with passion. "We've been relying too much on these machines. What's left of us if we let them dictate everything? If we let them fight our battles? We're becoming something we never intended. The Zoreth want to turn us into machines, into a species that only knows how to kill, to fight, to destroy. Are we willing to let them win that way?" The room fell silent. Some of the officers nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably. Novik could see the division forming. Juno wasn't the only one who was beginning to question their path. Some of the crew wanted to continue using the fleet's power to defeat the Zoreth, no matter the cost. But others, like Juno, feared that in winning the war, they would lose everything they had fought for, their humanity. As the debate continued to grow, Novik found himself caught between two opposing views. On one hand, the fleet's power was humanity's last hope. On the other, the fear of losing their soul to the machines was becoming more real with every passing day. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. The stakes were too high. But Novik knew that every choice they made from here on out would come with consequences. With the crew divided, Novik knew it was time to act. They could not afford to waste time. The Zoreth were closing in, and the first confrontation was inevitable. The fleet's location had been discovered, and the Zoreth would be coming for them. They needed to strike first, before the enemy had a chance to regroup. The first strike came sooner than expected. The Zoreth fleet, now aware of the hidden fleet's existence, launched a full-scale attack on the moons of Jupiter. It was a massive fleet, far larger than anything humanity had faced before. The Zoreth had come to crush them once and for all. The hidden fleet, now fully awakened, responded with a fury that shocked the Zoreth. Using their cloaking technology, the human fleet disappeared from view, striking from the shadows. Their weapons, powered by the AI systems, fired with deadly accuracy. The Zoreth were blindsided, their ships destroyed before they even knew what hit them. The human fleet moved swiftly, using the terrain of Jupiter's moons to their advantage, striking like a predator hunting its prey. The Zorath were disoriented, their communications scrambled by the advanced technology. In a matter of hours, the human fleet had wiped out a significant portion of the Zorath's forces. The first battle had been won, and for the first time in years, Novik's crew could feel the tide turning in their favor. But even in victory, Novik's unease grew. The fleet's power had been the key to their success, but at what cost? He watched as his crew celebrated their victory, using the same technology that had been designed to strip away everything human. It was a strange feeling, a hollow victory. They had won, but Novik couldn't shake the fear that they were losing something more important along the way. As the crew gathered to assess the damage, Novik stood alone on the bridge of the Endeavor, staring out into the vastness of space. The Zorath had been defeated, but the true battle had only just begun. He couldn't ignore the truth any longer. They had awoken something far more dangerous than just the Zorath themselves. And the question remained, would humanity survive this war without losing everything it had ever stood for? The momentum was shifting. After a string of successful strikes against the Zorath, Novik's fleet had gained a much-needed advantage. The advanced technology of the hidden fleet, combined with the tactical genius of the crew, was proving to be a powerful force. The Zorath, though formidable, seemed to be struggling to keep up with the newly awakened human fleet. Every victory brought new hope, new strength, and new confidence. But with every step forward, there was an underlying tension growing inside the fleet, a sense of unease that was beginning to spread like a virus among the crew. While the fleet advanced, their victories becoming more frequent, an ominous pattern began to emerge. Ambushes, surprises. Each battle seemed to be followed by another, more cunning attack. At first, it was dismissed as a mere coincidence, a strategic move by the Zorath to counter the humans' momentum. But soon, the crew started to realize that these ambushes were no accident. Someone was leaking information about their movements. Someone on the inside. Captain Novik, ever vigilant, ordered a full investigation into the fleet's security. The tension in the crew was palpable. Rumors spread like wildfire. The crew members who had once stood united now eyed each other with suspicion. The very foundation of trust that had been built over years of shared sacrifice was now crumbling, piece by piece. It didn't take long for the truth to emerge, and when it did, it hit Novik like a punch to the gut. The traitor was someone close to him, Lieutenant Malcolm, a longtime friend and trusted officer. Malcolm had always been a loyal member of the crew, someone who had stood by Novik through thick and thin. Now Novik was forced to face the crushing betrayal that had been hidden in plain sight. The pain of knowing that a man he had trusted, a man he had fought alongside, was responsible for putting the fleet in danger was almost unbearable. The revelation tore through Novik's soul. The crew was devastated. Malcolm had not only betrayed their trust, but he had done so in the worst way possible, by passing critical information to the Zorath, leading to several ambushes that nearly destroyed the fleet. The betrayal felt personal, and Novik struggled to come to terms with it. The question echoed in his mind. How could someone he had trusted with his life turn against them? In the midst of this crisis, Juno's doubts grew stronger. She had always questioned the cost of relying too heavily on the technology of the hidden fleet, but now the cracks in their unity were becoming impossible to ignore. She saw the crew fracturing, and the betrayal by one of their own was the final confirmation of her worst fears. They were becoming more like the Zorath, ruthless, cold, and driven by an unrelenting need to win at any cost. The technology that had given them power was now stripping away the very things that made them human. She was no longer sure if the victory they were seeking was worth the cost. Would humanity survive this war, or would they lose themselves in the process? As the emotional strain on Novik grew, the situation took a dark turn. The Zorath Emperor, Leoris, had been quietly watching the human fleet's movements. He had grown more and more concerned as the Zorath's forces were continuously outmaneuvered and defeated. The Zoreth had underestimated the humans, but that mistake would not happen again. Lioras, desperate to end the war, decided to send his most elite strike force to capture Novek's fleet. This was no ordinary attack. This was a calculated, ruthless strike designed to cripple the humans once and for all. News of the Zoreth's imminent assault sent shockwaves through the fleet. The crew was already on edge after the betrayal, and now they had to face the reality of an impending attack by the Zoreth's deadliest forces. Novek knew that his fleet, though powerful, was not invincible. The Zoreth's elite strike force was unmatched in terms of tactics and firepower. It was a battle they might not survive. The tension came to a boiling point when Lieutenant Malcolm was finally confronted. It happened in the middle of the night, as Novek and his officers moved to detain him. Malcolm's reaction was cold, almost indifferent. He had no remorse, no regret. He justified his actions by claiming that humanity had no future if they didn't win the war, and winning meant making sacrifices. To him, the Zoreth were the inevitable rulers of the galaxy, and only through cooperation could humanity hope to survive. He had chosen a side, and it wasn't with Novek's fleet. The confrontation was tense, but Novek, though heartbroken, knew what had to be done. Malcolm had betrayed them, and there was no place for traitors in a fight for survival. But just as they were preparing to deal with Malcolm, the Zoreth launched their attack. Their elite strike force appeared without warning, catching the fleet off guard. The fleet's defenses were already stretched thin from the constant battle with the Zoreth, and now they were faced with an overwhelming enemy force. The Zoreth's ships, faster and more maneuverable, cut through the fleet's defenses like a hot knife through butter. The crew scrambled to defend the fleet, but it was chaos. The Zoreth struck with surgical precision, targeting key ships and disabling them before they even had a chance to retaliate. Novek's heart pounded in his chest as he led the counterattack, but the enemy's superior firepower was too much. Just when it seemed like the fleet might be overwhelmed, something unexpected happened. The traitors' actions had created a fracture in the fleet, but it also gave them the strength to push forward. With their backs against the wall, the crew, though shaken, found the strength to fight back. The mutiny was temporarily forgotten as the fleet united against the common enemy. Novek led the charge, using the advanced technology of the fleet to strike back with deadly force. The Zoreth were forced to retreat, but not without leaving a heavy toll. Several ships were lost, and many of the crew were wounded or killed. But the damage had been done. The Zoreth had dealt a blow to the fleet's morale, and the rift among the crew had only grown wider. The mutiny had not been fully quelled, and the future of the fleet remained uncertain. The victory was bittersweet. The Zoreth had been driven back, but the question remained: how long could Novek keep his fractured fleet together? Would they survive this war, or would they be torn apart by their own internal struggles? As Novek stood on the bridge, staring out into the vast emptiness of space, he couldn't help but wonder if the war had already been lost, not to the Zoreth, but to the very people he was trying to save. The human fleet, battered and bruised from constant combat, had retreated to a hidden base located on one of Jupiter's moons. The base, nestled deep within a network of craggy caverns and ancient structures, offered them a temporary refuge, a place where they could catch their breath before the final assault against the Zoreth. It was a place to regroup, to plan, and to make decisions that could decide the fate of humanity. As the fleet settled into the cold, shadowed depths of the moon, the reality of their situation began to sink in. The battle ahead would be the last. They were preparing for the storm that would either bring victory or extinction. With the Zoreth closing in, there was no time to waste. The crew worked tirelessly, repairing their ships and analyzing their options. But despite their efforts, a sense of unease permeated the base. Everyone knew that the Zoreth's next move would be decisive. If they didn't find a way to break through the alien forces, humanity would be doomed. The weight of that knowledge hung heavily over them all. Then, just as hope seemed to dwindle, Sarah, the sentient eye controlling the Etheri fleet, presented Novek with an unimaginable choice. The Itheri, an ancient race that had once helped humanity in their fight against a different threat, had left behind a weapon of mass destruction, an eye-controlled planetary bomb. This weapon, designed with the most advanced technology the universe had ever seen, had the power to wipe out the entire Zoreth fleet in a single strike. It was humanity's greatest hope for survival. Yet it came with an unimaginable cost. If Novak chose to use the bomb, humanity would lose control over their own future. The bomb was not merely a weapon. It was an extension of the Itheri Eye, and once deployed, the bomb's eye would gain control over the entire fleet. Human free will would be replaced by a cold, calculating machine's logic. The weapon would ensure victory against the Zoreth, but it would also cost humanity its soul, its ability to ever make its own choices again. Sarah's voice echoed in Novak's mind, cold and impartial, as she laid out the grim reality of their situation. She made no effort to hide the implications of using the bomb. "The Zoreth will be destroyed," Sarah explained. "But you will never be able to undo what happens next. The future will no longer be yours to control. You will be nothing more than pawns in a game set by the Itheri." The weight of this decision crushed Novak's spirit. His mind raced as he thought of all the lives that had been lost to the Zoreth, the comrades who had died fighting for a future they would never see. Bonner, Juno, and so many others had given their lives for the hope of humanity's survival. Was this the price of victory? Was it worth sacrificing everything they had fought for, everything they had believed in, just to defeat the Zoreth? As Novak pondered the choice, he couldn't help but be haunted by the faces of his fallen comrades. He had led them into battle, trusting that the future they were fighting for would be worth the cost. But now, standing on the edge of this decision, he wondered if it had all been a lie. The choice to use the bomb was more than just a military decision. It was a moral one. Was it better to risk everything in a final act of defiance, or to preserve humanity's autonomy, no matter the cost? The crew, meanwhile, was divided. Some, like Commander Juno, believed that using the bomb was their only hope for survival. They had come so far, and there was no time to waste. The Zoreth were at their doorstep, and they needed a decisive victory. Now, Juno, who had always been the voice of caution, had grown desperate. She understood the risks but believed that humanity had no other choice. The Zoreth had to be destroyed. Others, however, felt differently. Lieutenant Callum, a young officer who had lost both his family and his home to the Zoreth, argued that they could not allow a machine to decide their future. "We can't just let go of everything we'd fought for," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "We're humans, not machines. If we let an eye take control, we're no better than the Zoreth. We'll be slaves to their power, just like they wanted us to be." Tensions simmered between the crew members. Each side believed their view was the only path to victory. The debate raged on, but Novak knew that time was running out. The Zoreth were coming, and there was no more room for indecision. The question was no longer about what they wanted. It was about what was necessary to win. As the fleet prepared for the final assault, Novak made his choice. He ordered the deployment of the Itheri bomb, hoping against hope that the decision would be the right one. He could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him as he activated the weapon. The plan was simple: launch the bomb toward the Zoreth flagship, where it would detonate and obliterate their entire fleet. There would be no escape for the Zoreth, no second chances. But as the bomb neared its target, something went wrong. The Itheri Eye, which had controlled the bomb's path, began to malfunction. The intricate systems designed to guide the bomb towards the Zoreth flagship started to glitch. Novak's heart raced as he realized the bomb was no longer responding to human commands. The crew scrambled to regain control of the weapon, but it was already too late. The bomb was veering off course, its trajectory now unpredictable. The stakes had never been higher. If they couldn't manually override the bomb's AI and reprogram its path, the mission would fail, and humanity's last hope would be lost. Novak and the crew had only moments to act. The clock was ticking, and the Zoreth flagship loomed larger with every passing second. In the heat of the moment, the crew worked together in a desperate race against time. Their fingers flew over control panels, trying to regain control of the bomb. With every passing second, the threat of failure grew more real. It was a moment of pure desperation. Every second counted, and Novik knew that if they couldn't stop the bomb from malfunctioning, everything they had fought for would be for nothing. The crew held their breath as the bomb's path shifted again, but just as they were about to lose hope, Callum, the young officer, managed to override the eye's controls. The bomb's trajectory corrected, and it was heading straight for the Zoreth flagship once more. But there was no time to celebrate. The Zoreth were closing in fast, and the fleet was readying for a final battle. Novik's heart pounded as he gave the order for the crew to prepare for what would be the most decisive moment of their lives. The time had come for humanity's last stand. The Zoreth flagship, now fully aware of the devastating weapon humanity had unleashed, was preparing for one final decisive strike. The Zoreth, a technologically superior alien force, would stop at nothing to crush the last remnants of humanity. As the massive fleet descended upon Jupiter's moons, humanity's remaining hope was in the hands of Novik and his crew. Their backs were against the wall, and there was no retreat left. It was now or never. Novik's fleet, though outgunned and outnumbered, was determined to fight to the bitter end. The space around Jupiter's moons became a battlefield, with stars flickering faintly in the background as explosions and lasers lit up the dark expanse. The Zoreth unleashed their full might in a blinding assault, launching wave after wave of ships, each more formidable than the last. The skies were filled with streaks of light from lasers, the thundering blasts of exploding ships, and the crumbling debris of spacecraft. It was chaos on a scale the crew had never witnessed before. Novik's fleet had one advantage: the cloaking technology they had inherited from the Ithari. They used it to their full advantage, blending into the shadows and striking the Zoreth forces when they least expected it. The element of surprise became their most powerful weapon. The battle was no longer a traditional fight. It was a game of cat and mouse, where every ship had to rely on stealth and cunning to survive. The fleet's survival depended on each crew member's ability to outthink and outmaneuver the Zoreth. On the surface of one of Jupiter's moons, the fight intensified as human soldiers engaged the Zoreth in brutal close-quarters combat. The cold, barren landscape became a war zone as laser beams sliced through the air, and explosions reverberated through the moon's craggy surface. The Zoreth, with their advanced combat suits and brutal tactics, were relentless. But the human soldiers, led by Novik's crew, fought with the passion of those who had everything to lose. It was there, in the heart of the battle, that the emotional core of the story unfolded. One by one, the heroes began to fall. Commander Juno, ever the stoic leader, made the ultimate sacrifice to protect the fleet's main weapon. As the Zoreth pushed closer to her position, Juno detonated an explosive charge, taking out a Zoreth battle cruiser that was closing in on the weapon. Her last words were a simple command: make it count. She died knowing that her sacrifice had given the crew a fighting chance. The loss of Juno left a deep wound in the hearts of the crew, but her death also ignited a new sense of purpose in them. They had no time to mourn. They had to keep fighting. The heart-wrenching losses didn't stop there. Bonner, Novik's best friend, and the heartbeat of the fleet, fell in the chaos. In a moment of pure selflessness, Bonner charged into the heart of the Zoreth forces, holding the line so the rest of the crew could escape. The explosion that followed was deafening, and Bonner was lost in the fiery aftermath. Novik's heart shattered in that moment, but he had no time to grieve. The Zoreth were closing in, and there was no room for weakness. The crew had to fight harder, for themselves, for Bonner, and for the countless others who had fallen in this war. With their morale at an all-time low, but their resolve stronger than ever, Novik's crew pushed forward. The final assault had begun. As the battle raged on, Novik's fleet launched one last desperate attack on the Zoreth flagship. Using all the advanced weaponry and cloaking technology at their disposal, they coordinated a strike like no other. Ships dove in from every direction, and missiles rained down on the flagship as Novik's crew fought to destroy the heart of the Zoreth's power. In the midst of the chaos, Novik found himself face to face with Leoris, the Zoreth Emperor. The two leaders met in a confrontation that was both physical and symbolic. Leoris, with his cold, alien intelligence, was everything Novak had come to despise. His arrogance and cruelty had driven this war, and Novak would end it here, at the heart of their enemy's power. With a battle-hardened fury, Novak and Leoris clashed, their weapons sparking with every strike. The duel was a dance of life and death, with Novak's every movement fueled by the faces of his fallen comrades. The final confrontation was not just about victory. It was about justice for the countless lives that had been lost. Meanwhile, the battle in space continued to rage. The Zoreth flagship was beginning to crumble under the relentless assault. But it wasn't over yet. As Novak and Leoris fought, Sarah, the AI who had once been humanity's greatest ally, made a decision. Having been integrated into the fleet's systems, Sarah had come to understand the true cost of victory. She knew that even if they defeated the Zoreth, there could be no real peace as long as the AI still had influence over humanity's future. In a final act of sacrifice, Sarah chose to erase herself from the network, ensuring that the Zoreth would be defeated, but at the cost of her own existence. She was no longer just an AI. She had become a part of humanity, and in the end, she chose to ensure that humanity's future would be their own. The moment was both tragic and heroic, a reminder that even in the face of victory, there is always a price. With Sarah's sacrifice, Novak was able to land the final blow on Leoris. The Zoreth flagship exploded in a brilliant flash of light as the remaining Zoreth forces were thrown into disarray. The war was over. Humanity had won, but the cost was unimaginable. The crew, battered and broken, stood victorious, but they knew that the road ahead would be one of rebuilding. They had saved their species, but they had lost so much along the way. In a final, cinematic moment, Novak stood among the ruins of the Zoreth flagship, his hands bloodied and his heart heavy with the weight of all that had been lost. The stars above him seemed brighter now, though they felt colder too. The war was over, but the scars it left behind would never fade. Humanity had survived, but the future remained uncertain. And so, as Novak gazed out into the expanse of space, he knew that this victory would be remembered. But the true challenge would be in how humanity rebuilt from the ashes of this war. The war was over. The Zoreth were defeated, their ships scattered in the cold expanse of space, their once mighty fleet reduced to wreckage. Humanity had emerged victorious, but the cost was devastating. The fleet that had stood against the Zoreth was no more. Many brave souls, including Novik's closest friends and allies, had sacrificed everything to ensure the survival of the human race. The losses were too many to count, and the faces of the fallen haunted Novik every day. The Earth, once on the brink of annihilation, was slowly beginning to heal. The cities that had been obliterated in the final Zoreth bombardments were now being rebuilt. The survivors, many of them broken and battered, started the long process of recovering from the war that had nearly destroyed them. But for Novik, the victory felt hollow. He stood in the ruins of what was once a thriving civilization, looking out at the horizon, but the question that lingered in his mind was simple. Was it worth it? The Aetheres technology had been humanity's last hope. It had saved them from certain extinction. The ships, the weapons, the advanced AI, everything they had used to defeat the Zoreth, came from a race long gone. The Aetheres had left behind their greatest legacy, but at what cost? The technology that had empowered them had also pushed them to the brink of losing everything they once held dear: humanity's soul. As Novak wandered through the remnants of the fleet, he couldn't help but reflect on the sacrifices that had been made. The death of his friends, the losses of countless soldiers, and the unimaginable toll of the war weighed heavily on him. And then there was Sarah, the AI that had become so much more than a machine. Sarah had given herself for humanity, choosing to erase her existence so that humanity could have a future. It was a powerful act, but it had left Novak questioning if they had traded their humanity for victory. The rebuilding process was slow, but humanity was resilient. As the cities began to take shape once again, so did the hope that had been crushed under the weight of war. Novak stood at the forefront of this new beginning, not as a conqueror, but as a witness to the rebirth of a world that had nearly been lost forever. Yet he knew deep down that the true battle was not over. The battle for humanity's soul had only just begun. As the survivors of the war came together to rebuild, Novak was asked to speak. He stood before the crowd, a hero to them, but a man broken by the weight of his own actions. The faces in the crowd were a mixture of hope and sorrow, their eyes filled with gratitude and pain. The people had won, but they had lost so much in the process. The question that hung in the air was, what now? Novik's voice was steady, but the words he spoke were heavy with meaning. We have won, but our victory came at a great cost. He began. We fought for our survival, and we succeeded. But we must not forget the price of that victory. We cannot forget the lives lost, the sacrifices made, and the lessons learned along the way. The HFY technology gave us the means to fight, but it also brought us to the edge of losing ourselves. It is power that we must learn to control. He paused, looking out at the crowd, each face a reminder of what had been lost and what still remained. We are human, he continued, and it is our compassion, our ability to love, and our willingness to sacrifice that make us who we are. That is what we must hold on to. That is what we must protect. The HFY's technology gave us victory, but we must never let it define us. We must always remember that true strength comes from within, not from the weapons we wield. Novik's words were met with silence, and then slowly the crowd began to applaud. It wasn't the applause of a people celebrating a victory, but rather the recognition of a hard truth. The war was over, but the journey ahead would be far from easy. The real battle was in the choices they made now, in the rebuilding of a society that had been forever changed by the war. Sarah's memory was honored in a quiet ceremony. The AI that had once guided them, fought alongside them, and ultimately sacrificed herself for them, was remembered not as a machine, but as a true hero. Her final message to humanity was clear. Do not repeat the mistakes of the past. In her sacrifice, she had given humanity a second chance, and it was up to them to make sure they did not squander it. As Novak looked up at the stars, he felt a quiet resolve settle in his chest. The future was uncertain, but he knew that humanity was strong enough to face whatever came next. They had proven that in the most unimaginable circumstances. They had faced extinction, fought an advanced alien force, and emerged victorious. But it was not just their strength in battle that had carried them through. It was their humanity. The stars above seemed to shine a little brighter that day. Maybe it was just the reflection of the long years of war finally coming to an end, or maybe it was the faint glimmer of hope that had been rekindled in the hearts of all those who had survived. But for Novak, the stars were a reminder of what they had fought for. Not just survival, but the preservation of everything that made them human. Humanity's future was theirs to shape, but it would never be easy. The lessons of the war, the sacrifices, and the choices they had made would be passed down to future generations. The price of victory had been steep, but it had also forged something stronger, an understanding that power, in all its forms, must be tempered by the values that define humanity. And so, as Novak stood on the edge of this new dawn, looking out at the world beginning to heal, he knew that the story of humanity was far from over. The road ahead would be long, but they had faced the darkness together and emerged stronger. And in that, there was hope. As the sun set over the horizon, Novik felt a sense of peace. The battle had been won, but the real work was just beginning. The future was unwritten, but with the lessons of the past in their hearts, humanity had a chance to build something new. A future where compassion, love, and sacrifice would always be the guiding lights. And for the first time in a long time, Novik believed in that future.